Hello and welcome to Good Film Hunting this week, a show where we try and unearth some movies you may or may not have heard of. I'm joined by Michael Lennon this week to discuss Black Coal, Thin Ice, a 2014 maybe art house noir crime would be the best way of putting it, but labels don't always do films justice. Michael, when we talked about this movie a few days ago, you said you were going to watch it a few days in advance to give you time to ruminate on it, shall we say. Is it a type of movie that sat with you long after you watched it? Well, what are your initial thoughts?
Um, yeah, it is a film that I enjoyed sort of turning over in my head. Perhaps not as much as I thought might be the case. I've watched quite a lot of contemporary Chinese dramas over the past couple of years. It's just a scene that I've enjoyed exploring a lot of the kind of bigger names of, and a lot of those films I've found have like really grown in the days after watching it.
Yeah.
And I've ended up maybe on day three having a much higher appreciation of the film than I would have just like straight after the end credits roll. Now, I would say that this film, it doesn't quite fit that mold because it's more of a genre film. It's more of a plot-based thriller than it is a kind of meditation on themes like some of the other films that I've watched, like Mountains May Depart, for example. So it looking at the film on a very superficial level before watching it, I probably had more of a expectation that it would require those days of marination to reach a full appreciation of it. And in actual fact, I think my opinion of it probably hasn't changed greatly since I watched it. But yeah, it's given me some time to kind of think through my thoughts on it, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of crime kind of genre movies I like in the sense of these detective kind of hard-boiled stories. The aesthetic and the environment in which it takes place is almost a character within itself. For instance, movies like Mystic River, Gone Baby Gone. I think that takes place in Boston. All these neighborhoods. One thing that really struck me about Black Coal, Thin Ice to begin with was just the aesthetic of the almost in cold industrial mixed with literally the cold environment of the snow and the hard kind of working class. Maybe I don't know much about China historically, so I'm not. Maybe you do more than me, but there seemed to be a downbeat sadness of the environment and the characters in this movie that was really striking. And the framing to begin with of I think it takes place in 1999 to begin with, where we follow. And I don't know if we've got a Chinese audience. If we do, they're going to be turned off after this because my pronunciation is going to be criminal. But Zhang, the lead detective, he starts off in 1999 where we meet him, and he's following these unique murders that I really liked, where these body parts start turning up on almost different like mining sites, I believe, because there's different coal mining factories, and then like maybe an eyeball will show up here, a body part will show up here and there. That's a really good intro into a story, and it fed into the environment quite literally in a very striking way that I actually haven't seen before. And like the coal in this movie, it is a slow burner, isn't it?
Yeah, I think just what you said there at the end about having not seen that device before is quite striking. I think when you watch sort of generic films, be it a film noir or detective movie or hard-boiled police drama or whatever it might be, mostly you're watching ideas that you've seen many times before, hopefully done well and done a little bit novel. But this particular device, the way this film opens, it starts with coal factories rather than coal mines all across the province, this northern province in China, suddenly realizing that there's like random body parts in the conveyor belts of the coals where the coal is going to be packaged and stuff like that. And yeah, that's the kind of catalyst that kicks off the story. I think we could talk this entire time just about the setting and the aesthetics of the film. Like you said, for me, that's the by far and away the best part of this movie. It's absolutely stunning to look at, like everything you mentioned there of the industrial city. Obviously feels very communist, like sort of towering buildings, but also feels quite Russian and feels very sort of Siberian and northern. This is a province that I think borders Russia and certainly borders Mongolia. The lead actor looks very Mongolian. It's not a China that you see much. It's everyone's in leather coats and trudging through snow, and it's the director, again, my flair for Chinese names is probably no better than your own, but
Right.
Diao Yinan, I believe the name of the director is. He
Yeah.
has a love for neon colors, so you'll get like a very gray concrete, like desaturated scene, but dotted with like blues and greens and reds, little accent colors here and there. It's
Yeah.
absolutely stunning film to look at. And I think, yeah, there was a lot of pleasure in it for me in just sort of getting to know this environment. Like you said, with Gone Baby Gone in Boston, when a generic film, it could be a film noir, but it could be an action film, or it could be a rom-com. When it has a really clear sense of place and environment, that's always a very welcome added layer to perhaps a type of film that you've seen many times before.
Yeah, and I think the cinematography really merges into maybe the plot in a way. It keeps you. It's cliche to say, but even in the most mundane things like coal trains going meandering by, it fixates you on the scene each time. Perhaps in a movie where the camera itself and the action itself is sparse, it's the type of movie where you do really need to concentrate on camera-like storytelling, because it's not so much in the dialogue. A lot of it's just in observing these characters, and when you've got an interesting setting like we have, it really helps complete the scene. Now the movie starts off in 1999. We follow Zhang. I'm going to pronounce it about a million different ways in this review, but he's a very unconventional detective as well, and this is where I have to figure out if it's a cultural depiction of things that I have a problem with, or if it's the character is meant to be depicted in that way. And I'm not sure if it's the first time we meet him, but he's basically grabbing his wife, or his ex-wife, because he's just got divorced, really uncomfortably and aggressively, to get on the train. Now, if we watch that in an American movie, that's kind of not to say it's a red flag you can't come back from, because we're quite comfortable to follow characters who like murder somebody and get on their side. But there's just something about there's certain things that characters can do that you can find quite off-putting and quite it underpin a kind of volatile nature for me. And I don't know if that's just a cultural thing in which it's quite acceptable to stop someone getting on a train in that manner, or we're really meant to see this person as a loose cannon. But a very, albeit depressed, loose cannon, which I think I've seen it in other iterations, but I was fascinated by this character, what he was thinking in every moment and every scene, without him doing the usual drinking and like beating down suspects here and there. He's almost a conventional loser in many ways, but to the prism of a Chinese cinema that I'm not familiar with. And I mentioned about the cinematography before as well. there's a scene early on. Now, this happens early in the film anyway, but we'll get into spoilers later, where I believe it's a hair salon. And you mentioned the contrast between the bright colors and the speckles of neon lights in contrast. When you get into these environments, it just adds such a cool aesthetic, but not in a Nicholas Winding Refn way, where it's like I'm just going for cool.
Mm-hmm.
I
was literally just about to say not in a Nicholas Winding Refn way.
Yeah, so, yeah. Because the characters aren't cool in this. The characters are really almost unlikable, but I don't judge my cinema on the morality of a character. I'm happy to follow these people on a journey. But anyway, we get this scene where, and not to boast, but I've just got new speakers, so the snow and the sound of feet, the sound of characters moving, just really spoke to me in a way that other movies haven't. Now, I don't know if going forward I'm going to experience that a lot more. But anyway, in that scene in the hairdressers, because the camera isn't flashy, you're almost seeing something in disbelief when basically Zhang apprehends some suspects that may or may not have to do with the I guess you could call him a serial killer, and a gun falls. The camera stays still, and before you know it, there's a lot of cops dead without a lot of camera movement. And it was almost like in real life, where you see something unfold and you're not quite sure what you're looking at, because in real life the camera doesn't cut, and the framing of that scene was very much from a singular perspective that unfolded this chaos, which took my brain a few seconds to catch up with, and it really had a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I've noticed in a lot of these Chinese films, and it's something that is in this film. I've seen the film following this by the same director, Wild Goose Lake. I'm not sure if you've seen that one, but it has a similar sort of thing where it'll hit you with, whether it's violence or just very precisely staged and choreographed kind of events, surprises that you're not expecting. You think you're in a sort of fly on the wall dialogue scene, or you think you're, even on a broader level, you feel that you're in a sort of character drama that wouldn't be capable of some very precisely staged moment like that of explosive violence that is really novel and interesting the way it's depicted, and it will kind of just erupt out of nowhere. And yeah, like you said, in this particular scene, it's a still camera. It kind of feels like it was an accident almost. Like it doesn't, it's not like the Fast and the Furious or something where it's just like slow motion insert shots and stuff like that. It's just clumsy, but all the more shocking for it. And yeah, this film has always got surprises up its sleeve, whether it's interesting locations or just iconic imagery that sticks with you. Obviously there's a lot of stuff later on with like ice skating scenes and a Ferris wheel and stuff like that. It's definitely not short of iconic imagery and events.
Yeah, so I know I give you a lot in my spiel a minute ago, but what do you think of Zhang as the character?
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about that early scene where he's just got divorced. This is how we meet him. He's just got divorced, seemingly against his wishes, from his wife, who wants to escape him and leave town on a train. And he, like you said, he's so distraught that he sort of tackles her to the ground and sort of tries to physically prevent her from boarding her train. And I think in most of these films where it's like a tortured police officer, the implication is that it's the case that broke them, that they were a normal guy, but they got so obsessed with solving this case that it turned them into an alcoholic, a depressive, a loose cannon. It's interesting that they introduce us to him prior to this investigation already a wreck and a loser. Like you said, he certainly is a loser throughout this movie. And I thought that was on reflection now, just as you're sort of saying it, it occurs to me that is probably better to do that. Then it kind of shaves away some of that like for like a conceit of like they're just so dedicated to solving the murder that it destroys them. We've seen that 100 times before, and I think I find that a little tiresome. There's movies I love that have that, like Zodiac, for example, Memories of Murder, but it's probably not the norm. I would say when people are investigating a murder, they probably investigate it as themselves rather than let it completely transform themselves over time. And especially seeing as this is set over a period of time, it starts in 99. Most of the film, I think, is in 2004. It fits very much in the mold of that. But I felt throughout the film that his scruffiness and his I guess, yeah, just overall messiness as a character, be it alcoholism or depression or whatever, were not sourced from the investigation, but were more just this is who he is in the world.
Yeah, I guess it is that initial framing when you're introduced to him that does give that impression. And like you said, we've seen a lot of movies where the main character gets destroyed by the case and his family breaks down, and this is almost done from that point in the beginning, if that is the reason, and it negates the problems that you've just mentioned. But one of the things that got me interested in this movie when we were just discussing what kind of movie we should watch is that the movie, and we're going to get into spoilers now, it picks up in 2004, where it does follow to an extent the genre blueprint of a character and his partner getting destroyed and disgraced by the case, because obviously after that absolute farcical botch in the hair salon, we pick up with someone at the side of the road on a bike, which turns out to be Zhang, where I don't know if he's drunk or what happened to him. I do believe he is drunk, and his bike gets robbed, which was quite tragically comical as well. And it just picks up where he's now working in security, and his life is even more of a mess, if that was possible. But he gets drawn back into a case that has striking similarities to the 1999 murder, and we get. I think she was briefly shown in the 99 scenes, the character of Wu, where he gets reintroduced to her again, and he becomes basically obsessed with the case. And this is the other thing, which the earlier scene where he's kind of when he's a bit physical with his wife early on, his ex-wife. I don't know if you've seen The Decision to Leave and these kind of movies where there's an almost eerie sexual, I wouldn't say romance, but almost
Obsession.
An obsession, yeah, with this on paper femme fatale. And one of the problems I always have with these movies is that, and especially in Decision to Leave, is that I always feel like the movie needs them to get together for these things to unfold. And so it does, rather than I never really in these movies feel a kind of genuine connection or genuine reason for these characters to get, I wouldn't even call it romantically involved, but certainly entangled in a relationship with whatever that may entail kind of way. And I thought about what this movie, how this woman, now fair enough, she works in the laundrette, she seems fairly depressed herself, how this would translate into her spending time with this guy who essentially stalks her.
Yeah.
To begin with,
I certainly, this film came out many years before Decision to Leave, we should say, so it is a coincidence how similar it is in many regards. But I agree that there isn't much there for to kind of justify in either film, this or Decision to Leave. There doesn't seem to be a great deal there to explain how the attraction is so mutual. I mean, you can obviously say that they're all good-looking people in these movies, but to have both movies imply that there is a deeper resonance to the connection, and that is, I think, undersold. But I would say that's a complaint that I have about virtually every film where people fall in love. Almost every time you see that on screen, it's like, yeah, I don't why? But also in real life, you can often say that as well. You're like, those two, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah, true.
I think this the film seems to have a lot of reverence, as we do as well, for the generic conventions of film noir and the femme fatale. And the rules are the person investigating, or I say person, but the man investigating the woman, the femme fatale, will become obsessed with her and fall in love with her. And if I was to sort of advocate for this film being like justifying the fact that his advances are sort of reciprocated, I would say that she seems like a very lost soul, and this, I think, is also what Decision to Leave uses a bit as well. This is someone in the femme fatale in Decision to Leave and in Black Hole Thin Ice are women coming from trauma and from a feeling of like lost in the world without any like firm anchor to latch onto. And early in this film, just to rewind a bit and kind of add a little bit more detail to the plot, at the beginning of the film, the body parts are all found, and then we seemingly the case is closed because we also find a name tag, an employee name tag, and a few other little bits and pieces of one of the factory workers. And it's assumed that this is the victim. So they go to the victim's place of business, which is a laundrette, and they talk to the woman. And they say, look, your husband's died. Can we interview you? She's just inconsolable. Later on, Zhang becomes involved again just by his association with his old partner. He ends up just bumping into his old partner, who happens to be on a stakeout. And it turns out that the partner is actually on a stakeout watching this woman, and it's told to Zhang that her two most recent partners, romantic partners, have been killed. So now she's kind of been involved, in a sense, in three deaths. One, her husband's death, and then more recently, two people that she was dating have died. Which again kind of overlaps with Decision to Leave, where the guy is watching a woman who might be a killer, who might be dangerous. And we know that you say we're over the spoiler wall now, but to not even go into the very end revelations of the film, but just to say that she's someone who's been through a lot. So and she's also been dating actively since her husband died. We know that. So maybe she's looking for something. And as I'm watching the film, part of me is thinking this is reality and it should be taken as a piece of realism because it's a new environment and stuff like that I haven't seen so much of. But then part of me is going, this is a genre film, this is a film noir, and in those cases I feel like there's less explanation needed for why things make sense. Why in action movies, when someone shoots a car, does it explode? You just go, that's the rules of this thing that I'm watching. So yeah,
I mean, like you said, and even though I queried why they would have a relationship, it did work for me just because of the level of despair that both characters generate. So
and the world of the film is just filled with despair, and it feels like if you existed in this world as any of these characters we're seeing, you would invite any kind of solace or comfort, no matter how shallow, into your life.
The world thematically reflects the characters at every turn. And another thing, just to mention quickly, that I really enjoyed, it's very almost procedural storytelling with the police work, almost in the sense a little bit like The Wire at times. Like, it won't be someone saying, let's go to this location. It'll be a character observing a bus, checking the license plate and then ending up at a location in these much more silenter scenes and less bombastic scenes, that if you're not paying attention, it doesn't, even though it makes perfect streamlined sense, it's if you don't give this movie your full investment, you are almost left wondering how did he manage to get onto this suspect? How did you manage to find the killer? Which we'll get to major spoilers now, really. So the main character, Wu, she really keeps her cards close to her chest in terms of her performance, in terms of what she expresses as an actress. I thought she was very good because it's a very internal performance, as the opposite to an external performance. And unlike it, I don't mean to compare it to Decision to Leave, but it just so happens that I've seen these movies lately. The femme fatale, if you will, of A Decision to Leave, she has a bit of menace to her, whereas with Wu, it almost seems like she's cursed from her performance, because you're saying, okay, this she seems like a nice woman, she seems very sad, but why does tragedy follow this character? And that was something that I was waiting on, in a sense. How is the film going to reckon with this? What's it going to give me? And getting into spoilers, it gives me something really spectacular, actually, in its reveal. Maybe not so much in its execution, because I think the movie pulls the trigger on something really unique and really thrilling, but then in typical Black Hole Tin Eyes fashion, it almost underplays its own reveal and focuses on what it's interested in from the beginning, really, which is ultimately the characters. It's a very character-driven film. So we find out that Wu's husband, who we presume dead, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this actually gets a little bit complicated, but he fakes his own death because there's a robbery gone wrong, and the reason why her next romantic partners die is because he kills them, right?
That is certainly the case, that he has killed her next romantic partners out of possessiveness. She initially says that the murder victim of the that was scattered throughout the coal factories was collateral damage in a robbery that her husband did. But when we later on find out that there was a guy trying to exploit her or blackmail her for damage that she had done to a coat, and sort of forced her into sexual favors, and that then resulted in his death. I think perhaps I wonder then, was there ever a robbery victim, or was it just that guy from the get-go? I'm not sure on that. It's either there was one or two murders that kind of happened right at that inciting incident. But broadly speaking, yes, he's still alive, the husband, and he's sort of living in the shadows. He is the murderer of the film, but her involvement of it, or in it rather, kind of extends as we learn more. But Andrew, it's interesting what you say there about, like, you really have to be paying attention, you really have to lean forward, and even our fuzziness now, we've both seen the film to completion, we've both had time to think about it, and I think I don't have that 100% straight in my head. I don't feel that's overly important, whether that was true, that he killed someone in a robbery, or whether he just killed that guy, and therefore it's kind of all because of her, any murdering he's ever done. I don't think that's overly important. But there are several things in this film that are overly important that I didn't understand as I watched it. And I did something that I very rarely do. I not out of some sort of principle, but because I very, very rarely need to do this. At one point, I was so unsure about a specific thing that I paused the movie and read the synopsis up to that point. And that is how they got on the trail of the actual murderer, the guy, the mysterious skater guy that we later on find out is her
Yeah.
husband. Apparently there is a scene where they are following her, and they this is the partner, so not not Zhang, but Zhang's ex-police partner. He is following her, and he follows her to a location, and he notices that there is another truck nearby that's kind of seemingly following them as well. So he decides to sort of peel off and follow that truck, and that's how he gets to that guy and confronts him in an alleyway, which then results in his death. To me, watching that without having read the plot synopsis on Wikipedia, I just felt like, how has he got to this guy? Why is he following this guy all of a sudden? And it seemed like a real random out of nowhere that suddenly this major character, who is arguably the third or fourth most important character in the movie, was just like plopped in without explanation. So you absolutely need. I felt like I was paying attention. It's not I wasn't dozing off while I was watching the movie, but I would probably say, and I don't like when people go like, I didn't understand the movie, so the movie it did a bad job. It's not about that. Like, there's no possibility that I could ever be not up to the challenge of a given movie. But seeing as this is more of a plot-based genre film, I felt that there was one or two things that were very subtly handled that. Maybe it's because I'm used to watching Hollywood movies, certainly wouldn't have been handled that subtly. There would have been a dialogue scene or something about, I've just seen a truck, I'm going to follow it, or something like that. And until I filled in the blanks with Wikipedia, that was something that left me a bit rudderless. And then just to add one more, which is also a major thing, at the beginning of the film, Zhang and his partner are police officers. Now, that is a bit fuzzy because they're not wearing uniforms. Now, granted, they're detectives, but the office that they go to, where they're all eating watermelon, it doesn't look that much like a police station. And myself and my wife were watching it, and we were kind of debating, are they police officers? Yeah, they must be police officers. They got guns. They're doing an investigation. They're police officers. Then in the next scene, you're seeing Zhang at the side of the road, drunken, like you saw. There isn't any overt statement that he's no longer a police officer. Now, he isn't anymore. We're in 2004, and he's a security guard. It's a factory security guard. And so we spent the next 20 minutes going back and forth. Is he just a security guard, or is he still a police officer? And when he folds himself into the investigation by joining the stakeout, it seems pretty frictionless. It doesn't seem so much like he's a civilian. It seems like he almost has equal authority to be conducting this investigation than he did have as a police officer. So again, this could be my failing. There's probably like a line of dialogue or something that would have made this concrete in my head. But as I watched it, for a section of the film, I didn't know if he was a police officer or not. And then when the main sort of baddie, if you will, or the main suspect of the film is introduced, I didn't know how they'd got on to that. And missing those two bits of lacking understanding radically ate into my enjoyment of the film that I otherwise thought was really good.
Yeah, the movie is a little bit of an enigma at times. In the early scenes, I had to burn all my, not to say my brain cells, but it's a type of movie you can't watch late at night. You need to watch it fresh in order to get the most out of it. Early on, I was able to follow the timeline, if you will, but that he was a detective, that this is happening, but I really did need to concentrate on who's who. And there is a line that says he works security, but to confuse matters more, in the next scene, he gets into a car and he's back on board with the cops again. So there is that. Now, I think, like I mentioned The Wire earlier, I think if you're watching something like The Wire, you become tuned into the rhythm of that type of visual storytelling, whereas in this movie, there's almost a few different beats happening at once. So you're so invested in the characters and the aesthetic, and there's slow shots. So I did register the van, but I didn't register entirely what it actually meant until I looked it up afterwards as well, because I when I was thinking about it, I was like, how did he get on the trail of the killer? Which we should mention actually. I thought this killer and the conception and his playground of ice skating was pretty iconic. Um, we have like people like Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. This is an almost subtle, more believable version of a serial killer that I've seen. When you tag them with some kind of serial killer like symbols, like he's got the skate around his neck, and that's how we identify him. We see him skating about, following people, but he seems like a dodgy guy. I really liked that character, and in the scene in the alleyway, I don't remember the actor's name, but he had a very subtle menace as well, where he doesn't exude any energy until he does. In that scene where he kills the detective, he's not showing any tricks. He's just standing there until he just turns very subtly and beats him to a pulp. And that, like the earlier scene with the gun, this has so much more of an impact because the camera's stable. But this is where the film, I don't know, I get into a conflict of the film I want to see and the film that happens. Now, soon after the revelation that the husband is alive, I think a Hollywood movie would up the ante to like 100, or this quote Spontab, up to 11. It kind of kills off its reveal fairly early after it happens, in terms of Wu sets him up at the shop, he runs away and he's dead, and then it goes back to dealing with the aftermath of what we just seen. And I think it gets you to the point where you're at the edge of your seat. You're like, oh my God, has the film been building to this? This is what we've been waiting for. All the pieces that we were confused about make sense. And it does make sense in a very satisfying way, actually. It's one of the few movies where I have questions and they're answered in a way that makes sense to the characters and makes sense to the movie's plot. That doesn't seem like it's just over the top for the sake of it. It seemed very satisfactory answers, and then the serial killer is dead, and the film kind of fizzled out to me. I don't know what you think of the final scene. Is Zhang dancing in a kind of dingy ass kind of, it would be a GA hall in Ireland. It's not quite a nightclub. Sometimes as a film critic, you're wondering if you're writing what you see in a scene or the director is. We get Wu finally admitting to her crimes with the police, bringing them to different locations where a new family live, and having to witness the pointing of the various murder shenanigans.
That's a lovely
that
detail, isn't it? The fact that it's a new family there. Like, why put that little wrinkle in? Well, it just makes it more interesting that we're watching a police scene of her sort of giving evidence and stuff, but like another family has to like let them in and sort of get out of the way while she walks around the house. That was cool.
Yeah, and they're just even sitting in the house. We get, actually, the movie takes time, which is what I like about this movie, to take a shot of them just sitting there, hearing it unfold, and just observing for a split second what would otherwise be extras, getting their thoughts. And it actually has a very profound impact in that scene. And then she gets escorted from the building, and loads of fireworks off. Now, in a Hollywood movie, that would be Vin Diesel firing a rocket launcher to free Wu. And it did cross my head for a minute, are we going to get some kind of swerve? But we never do. So we're left with a final shot of Zhang doing the best dancing he can do, which isn't very good, and mad fireworks as Wu gets taken away in the van, and the movie ends. What did you make of those final shots, and what did you make of the movie swerve from, shall we say, serial killer mania to what unfolded in the final maybe 20 minutes?
Okay, I got nothing. Basically, a lot of films struggle to end, I think, and to figure out a good way to end things. This film, as we've discussed, likes to do things in an understated way. It likes to not go for high sentimentality or high dramatics most of the time. As you said, and often to its detriment in terms of like signposting things and making things clear. But mostly it's a strength of the film because it feels very real, and it feels very well observed, and you invest more and more in this world and the characters because it all feels like you're looking at something that is real, and it's not just like a glossy Hollywood type thing. Now, I often will see things in films, especially at the end of films, but it can be throughout the film. But the way film ends often is like, let's go for one last push for arty, profound, open to interpretation kind of thing, because we kind of have nothing better to do than that. And that's a red flag for me. It's something that I may well be misunderstanding. There might be a bigger reading here. I will say that the film, this fireworks scene, it takes place in the daytime. It's not fireworks lit against night sky like you'd normally see them in a movie. It's fireworks going off in broad daylight. The name of the film in China is Daylight Fireworks. It's called Black Coal Thin Ice in the West. It also features a location, a very striking, stunning location, which I believe is called the Daylight Fireworks Club or something to that effect. So not that I have any explanation of this or can read into this at all, but there is a theme of daylight fireworks running throughout the third act of this film, and the film ends with it ends with someone up on a rooftop shooting down fireworks at the police and Wu in handcuffs. And like you said, we're expecting the Vin Diesel thing of like, this is Zhang who's like trying to free her and is or something like that. But it's not. It's a completely I mean, perhaps it is, or it's certainly not revealed to us who it is. The film ends with the police sort of trying to get up to the roof to just see what's going on. But we don't find out. And much like that, the scene of Zhang dancing feels like a bit of artistry just dropped into the film to make the film more interesting and more texturally complex. But if what that scene is trying to say is he's finally free from the shackles of obsession into this case, he's finally got closure, and now let's find a very visual way, even if it doesn't make that much sense, but let's find a very visually striking way of just showing him liberated from this like internal weight, then sure. But it doesn't really feel like it matches the character or the film that much. It doesn't necessarily have to. Like, sometimes a film can just give you a collection of images that stick with you, and they don't all have to like neatly fit into one kind of through line, but most of the film does. So those two things, the dancing scene, which incidentally I've seen in a lot of these Chinese films, there's often like a sort of a dance scene. There is a couple in this film, but the other one is more integrated into the plot. I'm talking about the ballroom dancing scene. Maybe there's a lack of understanding of Chinese culture on my behalf, that maybe what he's doing, going dancing on his own in this environment, is less absurd than it seems to me, who's not familiar with Chinese culture. But there's a couple of things there that you've mentioned at the end of the film that just left me a bit puzzled. I'm like, okay, I guess that's the way the film's ending. But if you take away those kind of artistic flourishes, the broad narrative strokes of the film's ending is quite cool. It's quite good. It's like he's not going to rescue her and have a big kiss on the sunset and stuff like that. She has done some crimes, or at least been an accessory to some crimes, and she goes down for it, and he moves on with his life, and that's more fitting with the film's understated nature than something more eventful, like they shoot each other at the top of a building or something like that.
Yeah, it's probably the type of thing that if you read a write-up afterwards that someone will have made sense of it and someone will have read into it, and maybe, like you said, they have an understanding of Chinese culture. But when we watch a movie, we can only go by our experiences and what's in front of us. Funnily enough, I watch a lot of quote unquote indie movies with my partner, and sometimes when I watch it, her biggest complaint is when the movie ends, it feels unsatisfactory, and that's more in the sense of maybe like a Duplass movie or a Mumblecore movie like that, where it's just you can't really end it because life doesn't end. So the unsatisfactory nature of the ending is because you want to spend more time with these characters. In this movie, it felt like they had concluded, just in a way that was unsatisfactory in maybe a character way, but narratively speaking, like you said, it holds up. And yeah, so I think it's a good film. I think it's worth watching. This I'm trying to link it in to the YouTube shows like name good film hunting, but I think just like the movie, I'm struggling for an ending of this podcast. So yeah, Michael, many thanks for your time, and we'll have you on again in a few weeks to talk about something else.
Pleasure. Yeah, we'll see you next time.